This is Tracy Drummond, archivist for the Southern Labor Archives. Today I am in Jacksonville, Florida with Linda Woodson. It's February 17th, 2015, and Linda has very kindly agreed to be interviewed for the Southern Labor Archives Oral Histories to talk to me about her life, but a very big important component was her work with Amtrak. So Linda, thank you so much for coming and having faith, because this is the first time we've actually met face to face.
You're welcome.
So let's just jump right in. Can you tell me when and where you were born?
Washington, D.C., January 19th, 1952.
1952. And what was it like growing up in D.C. in the 50s for you?
It was a wonderful time, but it also was a time of eye-opening situations regarding race that I was not aware of, but I became aware of. For example, there was when we moved to our neighborhood in Washington, we were the only black family.
So prior to that, you had been in a
we were
segregated.
Well, we were at my grandmother's house,
okay,
and I lived there till I was 4, so I don't really know the neighborhood, but I believe it was primarily African American. I know I had other relatives who lived in that same area. So when we moved to Northeast Washington, we were the only black family in that neighborhood initially. And I remember the old man next door, I went up to the fence and I was like, hi. He said, hello there, Sapphire. And I was puzzled as to why he would call me Sapphire. And I remember telling my mother, Mommy, why did he call me that man next door called me Sapphire? And my mother laughed. Well, of course, as I got older, I realized that was kind of a term used for black women. I guess maids and people that did work, laundry and things like that.
Domestic workers.
Domestic workers. It was kind of like the name that was given to them, Sapphire.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, well, on the railroad, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but there's a movie called 100 Black Men Named George.
I've seen it.
They were all called George. Why should anybody know what their name is? It's easier just to call them George.
Right.
They work on the train, they shine your shoes, they bring your food, they turn down your bed, they're just all George. Well, this is similar. I was Sapphire to this old guy. He didn't take the time to, and now he's an old guy. So as I got older, I understood that from his time period, it wasn't important to know a black child's name.
Mm-hmm.
And he may have had little, if no, interaction with black children until we moved there. But to be called that and not understanding it and asking my mother, what's that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of laughed it off.
Well, and why do you think she laughed it off?
Oh, because I'm sure that was a difficult topic for her to, how is she going to explain that to I guess I was 5 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
How's she going to explain that to, I guess, I don't remember exactly what she said.
Right.
But.
So your family moved to this new neighborhood, and so your mom and your dad?
And my brother and my sister. I'm the oldest of 3.
Okay, the oldest of 3. And everybody was already born when you guys moved. Everybody was
Yes,
already, okay.
yes, my sister was a baby.
Okay, and what did your parents do for a living?
My mom, well, I know at one point they both worked for the, what do you call that? The printing, the Department of something about printing in downtown Washington.
Is it the Bureau of Printing and Engraving?
Maybe that's it.
That's where they make the money, I think.
Well.
And then there's also the government
printing office.
The GPO, the government printing office,
yeah,
which is where they print the government
documents. They had to work at night. I do remember that. It was one of those, it was down on North Capitol Street, Northwest. And they both worked there on different shifts at night, and I remember that. And then at a certain time, I know my mom went back to school and she became a teacher. And then she went into special education. And she really went up the ranks because she furthered her education all the way to PhD. And at a certain point in time, she became the assistant superintendent for special education in Washington, D.C. My dad, he also had a college degree, but he didn't pursue any postgraduate education. And he worked for the recreation department in DC.
Parks and Rec, kind of the.
Well, it's called the Department of Recreation.
And so what kind
he
of.
was responsible for so many recreation centers. They may have been affiliated with a school, for example, Taft Recreation Center. Well, there was also a Taft Junior High School. He was responsible for overseeing the recreation center. There may have been basketball, tennis. There was a playground. He was responsible for the running of that.
And was it only for the black schools, or was it the black and white schools?
Well, it's not really the schools. It was the Department of Recreation under the city Department of Recreation.
Okay.
And the one playground that I remember, Turkey Thicket, there were both black and white kids there, because that's the first time I was called a nigger.
Really?
By this I was about 9 at the time, and this little white kid was 9, and he called me a nigger, and I went and told my dad. So my dad kicked him off the playground and said, "Don't come back until you apologize." And the next day the kid comes back and apologizes, and we became the best of friends. But, he learned that at home. He heard one of his family members saying that.
Right.
And but that was, there was black and white kids. I was on a bowling team there. It was all black and white, so.
So what made your parents want to move into that neighborhood? Was it to be closer to work? Was it to be closer to good schools?
Well, they wanted their own home. We were living with my grandmother, and we were living on the 3rd floor. And there was just 2 bedrooms up there, and my parents had them and the 3 of us, so they needed their own home.
Right.
So that's how we ended up moving.
So, and you said that one of your first experiences there was with your neighbor who called you Sapphire. But I imagine that there were maybe not so great experience, maybe things worse than that?
Actually, there were some very wonderful experiences, because it turned out that we really had a very international neighborhood. The next door neighbors moved. So more we had people from Santo Domingo on the corner, the Camados. Then we had people from the Philippines around the corner, the Cacanindans. And then we had white kids, black kids, the Puerto Rican. I mean, it was like a really international gathering. And my dad, of course, he was on playgrounds all day long, and he saw kids all day. So when he came home, he didn't want to see a bunch of kids, but everybody hung out at my house. So he made it known at one point that he didn't want to come home and have all these kids hanging out on the front. And so if we'd still do it, but then when they'd see him pull up, everybody would run in different directions. So it was, I don't know, it was fun. There was an experience. My best friend was a white girl, and we exchanged friendship rings. And everything was fine until one of her mother's friends saw us playing together. And her mother's friend said, "You let Karen play with that nigger?" And so Mrs. Richardson said to Karen, "You can't play with Linda anymore." And so we were devastated. We were best friends. So what we would do is we would get around that. And so if somebody had like a pajama party, her mother would say, "Who's going?" And she would tell them, but she wouldn't say me. And then I would walk so many blocks a different way, and she would walk so many blocks another way, and then we would meet and go ahead to the pajama party. So we figured around it. But then, a couple years later, no problem. I hung out at their house all the time. I loved the whole family. They loved me. But there was this period of time. Her father once called me a jungle bunny, which is a very derogatory term for. But I think this was from, I don't know. But once that period passed, I was at their home all the time, and there was no problem. And we hung out together. And she, in fact, when we were 18, we liked to play tennis. We played tennis every day, Karen and I, every single day. We'd go in the morning, then when it got too hot, we'd stop. Then in the evening, after the sun, or as the sun was going down, we'd go and play again. And I lost touch with her. so I don't know where she is.
Mm-hmm.
But so the neighborhood was a great place to grow up, and felt very safe. I walked everywhere. I either biked or walked. I was on my roller skates. I mean, we just bunches of kids. We were running all over the place. You couldn't do anything like. I don't see anything like that nowadays.
We all have TVs and
computers
and cell phones
and stuff. Yeah, so we were outside all the time, and in the summer, we were only allowed in for meals and to use the bathroom. Otherwise, no need to be in the house. So we were outside.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great childhood, actually.
Yeah, it was.
That sounds like a wonderful childhood.
It really was.
So as you started getting on up into middle school and high school, and I'm assuming at that point the school you attended.
Oh, I went to, from kindergarten to 8th grade, I went to St. Francis de Sales Elementary School.
And was that segregated or integrated?
That was integrated,
Okay.
Catholic integrated school.
Okay. And then, of course, at a high school you went to?
All girls Catholic high school, Immaculate Conception Academy, and that was also integrated.
So really, the experience you had was different than maybe a lot of African American kids.
I grew up in a very integrated environment as far as neighborhood, schools. Yeah. Now, I did go to a historically black college for 1 year. That was my father's alma mater.
Okay.
At Lincoln University up in Pennsylvania.
Okay. For 1 year?
Yeah.
And that was your freshman year?
Yes.
And why was it only 1 year?
Because I got married.
You were looking for your MRS.
So, and I was homesick, to be honest with you. My dad said, on the weekends, my father would say, "Are you back again? Weren't you just here last weekend?"
But I guess it was pretty easy to take a train from Pennsylvania.
Oh,
to
well,
DC.
actually, I got rides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
somebody was always coming back and forth between DC and Pennsylvania.
Okay. So your beau was in DC.
Yes,
Which is why you
he
wanted
went
to
to
come.
grade school. We went to grade school together.
Okay. And what? So in general, though, let me ask: what was expected of a kid growing up in your neighborhood, or maybe in your family?
Well, I can tell you what was
like as you were in high school. Like, was it for the boys that they would join the military? Was it the girls that they would go to college? Was it? Were there?
I can tell you expectations of my family.
Mhm.
College.
For everyone.
Oh yeah, there was. That was the expectation. Higher education. Well, my grandmother on my father's side, my father's mother was a school principal. My mother was a teacher. So higher education was it.
Yeah.
And that was the expectation.
So 1 year at Lincoln, and then you got married and moved back to DC. And did it take a while for you to continue or did you just apply and enroll somewhere else?
I got a job. I got a job at a mortgage company for a couple years, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I needed to work, so I got this job, and I worked for 2 years, and they went out of business, so I had to have a job. And a friend of mine says, "Well, they're hiring at Amtrak," and I literally walked. And this is a long walk from Northeast Washington to Southwest, and it's a long walk. I literally walked to go and apply for this job.
Was that because there wasn't a good public transportation system at the time?
I walked everywhere.
Okay.
You know, if I wasn't as a kid, I had my bike.
Mm-hmm.
As I got older, I can't tell you how much I walked around that city. There were buses.
Mm-hmm.
I liked to walk,
Okay.
and I figured I can walk down there. So I did a lot of walking.
Okay. So, well, let's talk a little bit about marriage. So, what was your husband doing while you were
Not
like
much.
right after you got?
Not much of anything.
Was he in college? Was he?
No,
in
he didn't go to college. No.
So he just worked, and you worked.
We
and...
both graduated from high school, and he worked. I think he got a job as like a delivery man or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so
it wasn't a good marriage.
it wasn't.
No. No,
Okay.
because we were very young. And he drank because he didn't know how to process emotions. So, and he had a tough childhood. His dad was a widower, and when I first met him, even though we were in the same grade school, he was in an orphanage because his dad just couldn't take care of him. So, yeah, he just didn't have the best. His dad did the best he could, trying to make a living and care for a child with no wife. But so, yeah, he didn't pursue higher education, although he did pursue later in life, long after we had separated and divorced. He pursued working with computers, and I understand he's done very well in that field.
Yeah.
So
Yes, that does sound very young. So you were probably 21, 22 when you walked all the way down to the southwest side.
I was 22, and I walked all the way down there, and they were, and I wasn't really dressed what you would call professionally now. I was more of like, I probably had on bell-bottom blue jeans and a shirt, but I looked nice. And the lucky thing was that I had taken a typing course in high school, and they needed somebody who could type and who could meet people as they came to apply for jobs. They needed a receptionist in their personnel department, so I was very blessed to get that job.
Okay, and that was 74.
March of 74.
And do you know if they had a big applicant pool, or do you know?
At the time they did, because Amtrak, officially started in May of 71. And that's when Amtrak took over running passenger service. Years and years ago, the freight railroads ran passenger service. Mm-hmm. And then there was a whole period of time where there really, I don't know how long it was where there wasn't freight passenger service. And then when Congress enacted that Rail Passenger Safety Act in 70, they put it under the name Amtrak, which is National Railroad Passenger Association, or National Railroad Passenger Corporation. NRPC, National Railroad Passenger Corporation, which is also known as Amtrak. And that officially started running service in May of 71. So when I joined in 74, yeah, they were just really getting into it and going strong. So they needed to hire lots of people to work on the trains and the offices, all the support system, all the support people. And the railroad industry was always a male-dominated industry. Mm. And then, of course, the black males were relegated to the service jobs, onboard attendants, waiters, porters on board the train. And I'm not sure what kinds of jobs they had off the train. I don't know if they were part of the gangs who kept the tracks up, or I don't know that history, just the history of the blacks. But women, you didn't see any women working there.
And when you started in the office, were you one of, or were you
they were starting to get more, like the secretaries. All of the big railroad barons had secretaries, but they were men. Mm-hmm. So one of my colleagues was he had been the secretary to the president of the Southern Railway. He was a male. But then by the time I was there, they had many, many female secretaries and a lot of African Americans. Amtrak was a great promoter of diversity, even before they knew it. So,
right. So for that first job as receptionist, you said your typing skills helped you.
That's how I got the job.
So, and you would greet people and help them with applications. You said with applications. What was it like being in an office like that for the first time? Was it so different from your mortgage job, or?
It was different in that in the mortgage job, I was responsible for doing paperwork to set up people's loan applications and things like that. And so I would talk to applicants on the phone about mortgages. But I was kind of in the background. Here I'm at the front desk. greeting people I was like the first person. I had many people say, "Oh, you were the first person I met at Amtrak," or you gave me directions to come down and apply for a job," or so.
And did you feel overall as a workplace, I mean, you said Amtrak promoted diversity, but did you feel like your coworkers were also supportive of the idea?
I think so, yeah. I think there were certainly there were some stereotypical situations and comments made. For example, one of my bosses there in that department said something about I would not make it going much further than the type of job that I had, that I should be satisfied with that because I probably wouldn't get, if I had any aspirations of going higher, give them up. He wasn't supportive of that, or that I would even be able to go higher in the ranks. So that was, and I don't know if it was a combination of me being a woman, me being an African American woman, but he seemed to think I would be just fine there as the receptionist. And then there was sexism, just, I mean, I don't know how detailed you want me to get, but there was definitely sexism.
Well, I think it's important, since I am, part of the reason that I feel this interview is so important is because you are female and you are African American, because you're helping fill in gaps, right, in the collections where we don't have stories or we don't have a lot of information. Only be as detailed as you feel comfortable. Yeah,
I mean, there was just a couple of situations that were very uncomfortable for me, where I felt I felt that my superior had taken advantage, or his conversations with colleagues from other railroads implied that he and I had a relationship, or that he and I were closer than we were. And it was very uncomfortable, because then I felt that these peers of his looked at me as some kind of whore or something, It was very uncomfortable, the things that he would say.
Well, there's also the very sexualized stereotype of African American women.
Yeah. So he would say these things, and they looked uncomfortable. And then, so I did the best I could with trying to somewhat dismiss, and it was always like a big joke. So I did the best I could to kind of dismiss it. But I felt that somehow I also needed to stand up for myself. And at a certain point, he did say something. He was having a meeting. And of course, I was responsible for getting lunch. The women secretaries there, we had to deal with coffee, buying lunch, setting up meetings, and setting up the arrangements for. So I had to go get lunch for him and all these people. And he said something very nasty, and but when I came back with the lunch, I gave a retort that I felt, where I stood up for myself. And one of the guys from Amtrak who was in there came out and said, "I really apologize. I can't believe he said that." He said, "But you handled it very well." So.
And you said it in front of all the people.
Everybody in there.
Okay.
Yeah, and mind you, this room is filled with men. At this time, there are no women in the upper echelons of the railroad. We are pretty much clerks, secretaries, things like that. So.
Was there any retaliation?
For my standing up for myself?
Yeah.
No. By him? No.
By anyone?
I didn't report it to anyone.
You didn't report? Okay.
I didn't report it. In fact,
so it stayed in that room. You sort of said what you needed to say, but it's not like you talked to someone else that maybe then tried to reprimand you or anything.
Oh no, I wasn't reprimanded.
Okay.
I think he had better sense than he knew he was wrong. So, but they didn't have anything back then like they do now, where you can report racism, sexism. anything, unethical behavior, anything like that. They didn't have that back then. I mean, I guess if I was that uncomfortable, we had a law department, and I guess I could have gone to our legal department and said, but I think people tried to handle things on our own. Now, after so many years, Amtrak did get a department, and I can't remember what they called it, but they were there to handle claims of racism, sexism, genderism, all that stuff. But this was in the beginning, and
did that pretty much prevent him
No.
from doing anything else?
no,
It continued.
yes, and so I had to leave that department.
Okay.
I chose to leave and work for somebody else, and I think I got my title. I think at that time was senior secretary.
Okay. And was that in '76, just a few years in, or would that
This
have
would
been?
have been, let's see, 74. No. 75, 76, 77, 82. This was around 82, I think.
Okay.
I'm getting my dates.
Let's let that train pass.
Oh,
It's it's gonna be louder than we are for I can't even see it. I think we're good now. So.
Let's see. I was the receptionist from about 74 to 76. Then I was a secretary 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83. It was around 83, I think,
Okay.
that I went to be this, I'm pretty sure it was senior secretary for somebody else.
So did you have to apply for those positions?
Yes.
And what was that like? Was there a lot of competition from inside
Uh-huh.
when something like that would?
Yeah, but the person who I went to work for knew my work well because his office was right there, and he was senior to my other boss, so he had seen me work. In fact, I had filled in for his secretary when she was out, so he knew me well, knew my work, and hired me. So.
And how did your duties change when you moved? I guess your first job was a receptionist, and then you were secretary, and then you were more of like a
Senior secretary.
So how did from receptionist going just into that first secretary position? How did they delineate the job descriptions? Like what were the differences?
Well, the receptionist, I basically greeted people. I had to type up whatever they need type. I worked in the records for personnel, people coming in, and in those beginning years, I would work through weekends. I could go days and days and days, and finally say, wait, I haven't had a weekend, because it was just so busy. They were bringing so many people in to work. So then when I became a secretary, then I was responsible for that particular department and that particular boss, doing all the typing. Back then we didn't have, they didn't have Xerox machines back then, so you had to use carbon paper. So if you needed to have 8 copies, you had to type through this carbon paper. If you made a mistake, you had to correct it on 8 copies. And so I did all the typing for that department, and that department was responsible for what they call contract administration. And
was that contract with the company and the different unions?
Well, it was contracts with the different railroads.
Okay.
So, for example, when Congress enacted this Rail Passenger Safety Act, and Amtrak was formed, the freight railroads still owned all the tracks. So they were hauling freight, we're hauling people. But Congress basically said, oh, there's the train.
Sorry.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. So Congress said to the freight railroads, you are responsible for making sure these passengers get from point A to point B on time, which means if your long freight train is coming along and a passenger train is coming along, you have to give the passenger train right of way. Well, contracts had to be developed between Amtrak and the freight railroads. Very detailed contracts about how this is going to happen. So,
And did they have to like pay to rent different routes? Or?
as I recall, Amtrak paid incentives to the freight railroads, either Amtrak or Congress. I don't think it was Congress. I think Amtrak. I'm not sure. The freight railroads got incentives to run our trains.
Okay.
But let me tell you.
So maybe not a cash payment, but maybe an ease up of some requirements.
Yeah, I don't know
somewhere
exactly
else.
what
Okay.
the details were, but the people in my department were responsible for those contracts. And here we are in, what's the year, 2015, and I can tell you right now, those trains will be late a lot of times because a freight train is in front of them.
Really?
So I don't know what's happened with the contract group and Congress's mandate that the freight railroads will give right-of-way to the passenger trains. I don't know, because I haven't been in that field for a while. But anyway, that's what I was responsible for. So typing up contracts. For example, the Alaskan Railway asked Amtrak to run their train. And so our people had to go up and ride the Alaskan Railway and check it out and see, would this be lucrative for us to operate? Those kinds of things.
Okay. And then when you became an administrative assistant in '82, just where we had just gotten, how did your duties change?
I was responsible for providing assistance to the man who was over all of several departments at that point. So then I was kind of like the lead secretary over many secretaries.
Okay.
And so my boss was, I guess he was like considered the vice president of operations or transportation, something like that. He was a VP. And he traveled a lot. I had to develop his itineraries, make arrangements, and
When he went places, did he take the train or did he fly?
it depended.
Really? So
Yeah.
he would take the train?
Oh, primarily,
Okay.
yeah, he'd take the train. But of course, if he had to be on the other side of the country and get back, depending, he'd have to fly. But we also had a private car that we could put on the back of a train that was, it was a really nice way to travel. You know, it had a living room, it had a beautiful dining room, several bedrooms and baths. So it was a very comfortable way to travel. So they would sometimes use that to go cross country and then maybe fly back.
Okay. So that would go on the back of a passenger train. Did you ever get to take a trip?
I've been on a private car, yes. Very, very nice. Very nice. I didn't go as long on the trip as some of these, for some of these long trips. But yeah, I've been on them for dinner and maybe a short trip. It was very nice.
And I still think there's something very romantic about train travel. Were y'all trying to incorporate that maybe into your marketing or advertising?
There's something about a train that's magic.
Was that an actual?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something about that was on TV commercials. There's something about a train that's magic.
And you don't see as much television advertising for Amtrak as you once did.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't usually watch a lot of commercial TV. I mean, I have my favorite shows that I tape, but they're usually like, HGTV, and I don't know that they have, I guess they have commercials on those. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
But they're usually for very specific sponsors.
Yeah. But that was a real big one. There's something about a train that's magic.
Speaking of romanticism, were there ever discussions about trying to be more like European rail and keeping up with trends in Europe? I mean, because that's one of the complaints often heard is that just the railroad system here is not.
Well, the European passenger trains have their own tracks. And if there's freight that's operated on those tracks, they must be operated at night or something. I mean, they have some very specific rules about that. I've been on European trains, and they are on time. And but as long as you have freight railroads owning the tracks that Amtrak passenger trains have to operate on, the only place I know that, well, Amtrak owns the track between Washington, D.C. and Boston. That's our track, Northeast Corridor. And then there's, I think, 100 miles of track that Amtrak owns somewhere between Indiana and, where's Chicago? Illinois. Between Indiana and Illinois or something. There's 100 miles of track that Amtrak owns. The rest of the track in the country is owned by the freight railroads. So we'll never be like European trains because we'll never own all that track, and we'll always have to rely on, I'm saying we, I'm now retired, but they'll always have to rely on the freight railroads giving them right away.
Were there ever discussions about getting, I guess, more support from the government to... Yeah, no, this isn't, but it's an important thing to talk about.
When Democrats are
She laughed, by the way, for people that can't see that she laughed when I asked her.
When Democrats are in office, it's very good for Amtrak. When Republicans are in office, it's very bad for Amtrak. They want Amtrak, the Republicans basically want to privatize Amtrak, break it up. We don't need national rail passenger service.
And what would be, for people who aren't really familiar, one of the big problems or issues with privatization? What would be?
Well, I don't know all of this. I do know that I believe is it Senator Micah or Congressman Micah? I don't know. I know he was talking about giving an auto train to one of his friends who's a transportation person, let him run that, which meant that wouldn't be a part of Amtrak. And then maybe there's a service on on the West Coast that's really prized service from San Diego up to Oakland, and it goes along the Pacific coast. Maybe somebody else could take that and run that. And then, of course, you got the Northeast Corridor from Washington to Boston. That's a prized service, so somebody else could run that. Well, then you don't have a national rail passenger service. You have a lot of different private services that are being run.
And would that lead to deregulation?
I don't know what it would lead to, but it wouldn't be Amtrak.
Right.
It would be, I guess, that would be the Pacific Coast Service, and this would be the Amtrak. In my mind, Amtrak was always set up to fail, and we never failed. We just kept going and going and going. I don't know what the future holds, and there's a lot of politics behind it. So I have no idea. I haven't been around there since I retired, and I don't know what's going on with. My sister still works there. My sister has been there over 40 years.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. When I went to become the receptionist, I called my sister up. I said, "They've got jobs here. Come get a job." And I got there in March of '74, and she joined in, I think it was August of '74. And so she'll retire next year with over 40 years of service. So I'll have to ask her what's going on.
So you were administrative assistant from 82 to 89, but let's stop talking about, before we get to the safety department and that stuff, because you mentioned to me that you, during this time, went back to school.
Oh, yeah.
So can you talk a little, like when you started and what you studied and...
Yeah, well, I did go back to school in, I'm going to say maybe around 76 to 78. I went back to school, and it was too difficult. I had a small child. I was working full time, and I said, this is too much. And I had just taken some general courses. And then, but I still had almost 2 full years of college, the 1 full year up at Lincoln University, And I think I got close to my second full year, around about 76 to 78 somewhere. So then in 94, and Amtrak reimbursed me for, if you got a certain grade, they would reimburse you.
That's great.
So I would pay up front and then submit my grades and they would reimburse me. And then in around about 93, I went to school full time and worked full time. And I had a lot of support at work. My supervisors knew the quality of my work, and they knew that I was going to work and get all my work done and go to school. So it was really tough, but I managed to get my bachelor's. I got my bachelor's in 96 in social work. I had decided that I wanted to go towards social work. And
why did you decide that?
I knew that I wanted to help people. I didn't know that I was going to necessarily do it at Amtrak. I wasn't sure, but I knew that I wanted to help people. I also knew that people always shared a lot of information with me. And I remember asking this woman, oh no, I didn't ask her. She said to me, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. And then she said, oh, I know why, because you're listening. And that clicked. And I said, that happens to me a lot. So maybe I should kind of go towards that kind of a field since people are. So that's how I ended up in social work. And I love the course of study. And so when I got my bachelor's, there was this.
Where did you get it?
University of the District of Columbia, UDC. I think I must have decided at that point that I was my goal was to work in Amtrak's employee assistance program. So when I went back, I'm pretty sure that was my goal. So I'm going to get this bachelor's and I'm going to work for Amtrak's employee assistance program. And then I got that degree in 96 and I said, you know what, it's taken me 27 years to get a bachelor's, so I better go straight in and go for this master's, which I did. And I knew that I would need the master's to get this EAP counselor job at Amtrak. And so I graduated from Howard University with a master's in social work in 98. And my great uncle graduated from Howard, and my great grandfather graduated from Howard in 1904 with a divinity degree. And his son, my great uncle, graduated from Howard with a medical degree. I don't know what year, but so it was pretty cool when I graduated from Howard, and I went into the chapel and just sat there for a moment and reflected on my family history here. So that was pretty cool.
And Howard is a HBCU?
Yes, in
Okay.
Washington.
So you were able to sort of fulfill that part of your education where you'd started at Lincoln to go to HBCU.
But I mean, that's not why I went there. Just they had a good social work program, and you know, to be honest with you, I mean, I knew that my great uncle and my great grandfather went there, but that's not why I chose it. They had a good social work program, and it was convenient. So,
like holding a full-time job and being able to. So mostly night classes or weekend classes?
Night classes, day classes. I submitted, when I went to work for my master's, I submitted a proposal to the heads of the safety department and said, look, I travel all over the country because I was responsible for passenger safety and public safety, educating people about the public about obeying warning signs and signals at highway rail grade crossings. And
you had started with the safety department in 89.
In 89. And then by the time I was at Howard getting my master's, I was a manager of passenger safety and Operation Lifesaver at Amtrak. So that was a huge responsibility, but it was a national responsibility because I was responsible for passenger safety nationwide and public safety nationwide. So I did a lot of traveling. So I
And
told.
that's a big, can I just say, that's a big jump from administrative assistant
Well,
to.
wait a minute. 89, I was administrator. 1989, my title was administrator, safety
Okay.
department.
Okay.
And in that role, I was responsible for reporting grade crossing collisions, fatalities with the Federal Railroad Administration. So my job was reporting every time somebody got hit by a train, every car, every pedestrian, every crash, every collision. I was responsible for. So that was my job from 89 to about 95. And then in 95, I became manager of the systems and programs. I was responsible for maintaining and developing the systems that captured all that data that had to be reported to the Federal Railroad Administration. And then 98, 95. So when did I become manager passenger safety and operation lifesaver? That must have been, I don't know, 95, 96, maybe 96.
You said 96 a minute ago because I made a note of
Well, maybe the manager systems programs was a little earlier. That might have been
Okay.
93.
Okay.
And then 95, that's when I became manager passenger safety and operation lifesaver. And so I submitted a proposal to my boss that, look, I can travel, get my work done, and get my schoolwork done if you will allow me to go to these day classes. I said I will work on the weekends, I will work at night, and they agreed, and I was able to get it all done.
And so when you were going around, you said you were responsible for passenger safety and.
Well, passenger safety and operation lifesaver, which was a public safety program, educating people about.
So you were educating the public.
Yes.
And not Amtrak employees.
I was educating Amtrak employees too, because
Okay.
even though these people, the Amtrak employees worked around trains,
Mhm.
they could be careless. You know, they could get off a train and run across a track. Well, wait a minute. Are you looking both ways? Do you know if there's any train coming? So I would educate not only the general public, but Amtrak employees as well.
So when you talk to the Amtrak employees about these things, would there just be sort of like a local office you could go to where,
All over the country.
or like would you, and then their boss would say, okay, everybody's got to go and attend this
Yeah,
and maybe do a couple of different sessions so
Yeah.
different shifts could come and
yeah.
okay. And when you were doing it for the public, would you work with local organizations?
It depended, like up in, they had started some new passenger service up in between Whitehall, New York, and someplace in Vermont. I can't remember. New passenger service. And they'd had freight trains go through, but not passenger trains. So I went up with a couple of other Amtrak people to meet with the community. We went to every school to do presentations. We went to local political meetings. I mean, we had to get people ready for passenger service and be prepared for what does that mean. Our trains are going to go faster, and so there's a lot of safety implications. And so I would go to different cities where service was being started, or I could just go to any community, truck drivers, school bus drivers, driver's education classes, anybody who would listen. I would set up presentations to educate, and then I would keep records of that because, God forbid, somebody gets hit by a train and they say, well, Linda Woodson and her group didn't come up here. And that place up between, it was Whitehall, New York and Rutland, Vermont. A week after we left, a kid got hit by a train up there. And but we had been to his school, so nobody could say we hadn't been there
Right.
to talk to the kids at the school. So they had a situation in Wilmington, outside of Wilmington, Delaware, where this girl and her friend were walking on the tracks. Not a good place to be. But a lot of people don't understand, first of all, the track, it's illegal to be on the tracks, first of all.
Okay.
It's private property, it's illegal, but it's also unsafe to be walking on the tracks. Well, anyway, this couple's daughter and another girlfriend got killed, and they wanted Amtrak to slow down in this area. Well, we're talking 125 miles per hour. This is track. And there's also overpasses that people.
It's like that scene in Stand By Me where they're, did you ever see that movie?
No.
Where they're yeah, it's a bridge. They're on a bridge that's a railroad track.
Well,
and
that's
the
a
train starts
trestle.
coming,
Yeah.
a trestle.
Well, yes,
And-
that's illegal too. But I'm talking about an overpass over the tracks.
Oh, I
so
see.
that people can get from one side of the street to the other. They don't have to walk across the tracks, but they don't want to go over the overpass. They feel it's quicker to go over the tracks. So, we'd have to go to these communities where people were killed and explain to them, these trains, even though Amtrak's coming through here at 125, this freight train is coming through here at 60. Guess what? It's still going to kill you, whether it's going 60 or 125. And so to try to they kept saying, we want you to go too fast. So I was trying to get people to understand, if we go 30, that's fast enough to kill you.
Right.
And this may sound disgusting, but the only difference between getting hit by a train at 30 and getting hit by a train at 60 or 80 is there's bigger pieces of you if you get hit at 30. And if you get hit at 125, there's probably nothing left of you at all. But trying to be empathetic to somebody who's lost a loved one, and at the same time help somebody be realistic about this situation, because no parent wants to hear that their child was a trespasser. A child's been killed, they were trespassing. So it was a very delicate balance that I had to tread in being empathizing and then trying to educate a community. Even though there are these, what they call inter-track fences to keep people from going across, and you've got an overpass to say, this is how you get over. Even with all of that, I still had to be empathetic when people chose not to do that and got injured. So I was a bit of a social worker in that role.
Right.
And
a diplomat.
And there was a situation where an older sister took her younger sister. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with inter-track fencing, if you know what I'm talking about. So here's some train tracks here, and here's some train tracks here. And this is a fence. And this is a road, and this is a road. So this fence keeps people from going across here and there to get to the other side of the road.
Okay.
Because this fence is so high, you're gonna have to climb it.
Right.
And so nobody wants to go over this nice little bridge that's there. So this fence is, I don't know, say it's 5 feet high. Well, this older sister took her young, and the fence doesn't go the entire length of these two tracks, but it goes the length where people may want to cross. So she took her little sister, and they're walking down here, and they go to the part where the inter-track fence stops, and they go around the fence to here. Well, by the time they get here, train's coming. The big sister makes it, the little sister gets hit. Well, the little sister didn't die, but she has really significant injuries. Now, Amtrak paid for that child's medical bills. Even though we got an overpass here, we got a fence there, guess what people said? The fence should have been higher. To deter people who choose not to go over the overpass, the fence should have been higher.
But they didn't use the fence.
Well, no, the fence is to deter you. No, they went around the fence.
And how would the fence have been?
Well, yeah, and I see your point there. Yeah, well, for people who climb the fence,
Right.
that's the thing. It should have been high. Yeah, in this particular case, she went, and that's a long way. Do you know that her walking that distance to go around the fence, she could have been over that overpass and on the other side of the street. So, but for people who climb the fence, yeah, they say it should have been higher to deter people from climbing it. So that's what I did from about 95 to when I started EAP in 2000.
Okay.
I was a manager in the safety department. And the passenger safety was anything that impacted the safety of passengers on the train. If I saw, I don't know, a lock that wasn't practical, I said this is a passenger safety hazard, or something that's handled in the kitchen that I had a concern about, or a slip, someplace they could slip and fall. Any hazard on the trains, in the stations, I was responsible for working with safety committees, because we had safety committees all over, to develop programs for passenger safety, making things safe. So, and my whole family calls me Miss Safety. You know, once you're in safety, you hone in on unsafe things immediately. And so my friends, that make them sick. Do you have batteries in your smoke detector? How often do you change them? Do you have a mat on your bathtub? Do you know how many people slip and fall in their bathtub? I drive them crazy. So,
Well, I have a follow-up question about, you would go and talk to employees. Was there, when employees started with Amtrak, was there a like a safety like tutorial or
in the
training
very beginning when I first went there, no.
Okay.
But later, yes, there was definitely what they call new hire training. You would learn about, because these are invariably people who've never been around trains.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be safety programs and classes, and you're going to have to get periodic training too about being around some heavy equipment, and it can be on you before you know it.
Mm-hmm.
So people who have to work out there with the trains and everything. Yeah.
Did you have to work with OSHA for some of that stuff, or
For some, occupational safety and health is it occupational safety and health administration? Yeah, definitely. OSHA was one of our regulatory agencies. Yeah.
Okay. That actually sounds really interesting. My friends call me Safety Tracy.
Oh, good for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about.
Indeed I do. So I'm actually sort of fascinated hearing about detailed stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's great. And it sounds like you really enjoyed the work too.
I did. It was interesting, and I wanted people to know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need to know this. Here's something. How many times have you been in your car and you're driving down and you see a guy waiting at an intersection,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, oh, he's not going to come out. He sees me, and as you're getting closer, all of a sudden he pulls out in front of you. It's like, didn't he see me? And you got to hit your brakes.
Why didn't he do that when I was a quarter of a mile away?
Do you want to know why he didn't?
Why?
Because of something called the looming effect, where a large object appears to be going much slower than it actually is. Think about when you see a plane come in for a landing, and it looks like, wow, it doesn't look like it's going 250 miles an hour, or however fast it's gone. How many times have people said, well, the train didn't look like it was that close,
Right.
and they try to beat it and they get hit. Same thing when you're in your car. You think, here's this guy, oh, he's way back there.
Mhm.
He's not. Same situation. It's called the looming effect. So
That's
a
fascinating.
large
Yeah.
object appears to be going much slower than it is.
Okay.
And that's
Is there some physics math? Is there
I'm sure it's
stuff
all
behind that?
about physics, yeah.
Okay. So, okay.
And that's what we would tell people when we would educate them,
Yeah.
when people would say, well, it looked like I could beat the train, or it looks like it's not going that fast. It is going that fast,
Okay.
and you cannot beat it. Don't even try,
Right. Why would you try?
because people think they kill. You heard about that Hollywood guy that just recently got hit by a train? He was a...
No, they were in South Georgia and they were filming. Is that the one you're talking? Are you talking about a different?
Well, this was I thought they were in California, but maybe he was a physical trainer and he was going to do a commercial about this energy drink that made him like Superman, and he was going to be faster than a speeding train. And they had the camera crew there, and anyway, he misjudged the speed and distance of the train.
No, this was actually a camera crew who were filming a movie.
Oh, that was a movie. No, this wasn't a movie.
Yeah, in Georgia, but they said that they had talked to the railroad about.
Yeah, these people didn't talk to the railroad.
But then the railroad said no, they really didn't talk to. I think it was that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so there was somebody, like one of the cameramen was on the tracks and was killed.
Yeah, well, this was the personal trainer, and he was an actor. A well-known Hollywood actor. Well, not well-known, because I didn't know him, but he was a personal trainer and an actor. And anyway, but he misjudged the speed and distance of the train because of that looming effect.
The looming effect. I'm going to have to read up on that.
Yeah.
That's just the kind of research I like to do. So you said you were there, and wait, so before we get on to the next, because we've talked a little bit about your education, but the first time you tried to go back to school, you said you had a little.
I just was stressed. I just was working hard, and our kids were younger. By then, I'm with my second husband, but we weren't married. We lived together for 19 years before we got married. Our kids were young, and I just didn't have the energy and I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I went about a year and a half and tried it and just said, I just can't do this anymore.
But by the time you were manager of passenger safety, your kids must have been grown.
Yeah.
Let's
see, they were born, and my husband's daughter was born in 1969. My son was born in 1971. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't have to deal with kids, and even though I had a very hectic job, I was very goal oriented at that time to go into working with EAP. Well, I didn't know I wanted to do EAP right away, but
and EAP
is Employee Assistance Program.
Employee Assistance Program counselor. You were a counselor.
I was an EAP counselor. Yeah, and I started that in '99.
And how long had that particular office been established when you started doing it?
Well, EAP had been there a long time, but it first started, as most EAP started, was primarily an alcohol prevention program, and most work sites had something. Okay, so you're familiar with that. And so that it had been around, but it had kind of shifted and changed, at least at Amtrak, under the different departments. But I spoke to the manager of EAP. I guess this was before I got my master's, or maybe as I was getting close to my bachelor's, and I told her my interest. She said, well, you'll need a master's, minimum of a master's to work in this department. And so that's when I said that's my goal, even though I'm still highly focused on safety. And as far as I was concerned, safety and EAP was very compatible,
Right.
Helping people manage mental health was very important as far as safety goes. So
I agree. So so you've got your degree and you've got all your safety background.
Yeah.
And it's 1999 and you become an EAP counselor. And I assume that brought you back with less travel, or did you still travel?
Well, no, because actually I didn't actually start in EAP in 90. Well, I think near the end of 99. No, I got that job in 2000.
Okay.
In 99, wait a minute, 99 I moved to Florida. All of my previous job, I worked out of the Washington, D.C. office at Union Station.
And you were all in the same office all those years?
Well, yeah.
In the same building?
Yeah, but I traveled, my job was a nationwide job. In 99, my husband and I moved to Florida, and I moved to the Jacksonville office, but I was still responsible for my nationwide job. And when I submitted a proposal to relocate my job, I said, look, if I have to fly, I can fly out of Orlando or Jacksonville just as easily as I can fly out of Dulles or National up in DC. So they agreed and let me relocate the job. But the head of the EAP at that time was asking me to work because in safety for keeping track of these, what they call critical incidents. Every time our train hit a pedestrian or a vehicle, it was very traumatic for our engine crews, for our crews on the train.
Mm-hmm.
So he asked me to kind of help him develop this program to follow up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and to provide some assistance, psychological assistance to these people. So I started doing that. And then when they got the job in EAP counselor job in Jacksonville, I applied and got it. And it was responsible for services in North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. So I was responsible for EAP services in those 10 states. Now, most of that was telephonic for immediate needs,
Mm-hmm.
but I would also travel to those different states for trainings, education, meeting with employees, that kind of thing. So,
and so what did that, can you talk a little more in depth about with that, doing the one-on-one counseling? You don't have to, I mean.
Well, anytime an employee or their family member had a problem that affected their quality of life,
Mm-hmm.
their ability to do their job, their mental health, they could call Amtrak's Employee Assistance Program.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people in those states knew who their EAP counselor was.
Okay.
And so they could call. I would do an immediate assessment. If I had a concern about safety, if I thought somebody was going to hurt themselves or somebody else, then I had to immediately contact 911 or set up a safety plan, get a family member involved, talk to them. You know, if it was something that was not an immediate safety concern, then I would do an assessment of what they needed. If it just required some short-term counseling that I could assist them with, then that would be what I would do. Or I would refer them to a therapist in their area who was specialized in whatever the issue was: drugs and alcohol, family marital, mental health, anxiety, depression, whatever. And then I did a lot of training, stress management, conflict resolution, mediation, managing and understanding grief and loss, you name it. So.
And I imagine it was especially difficult. You mentioned a little bit ago about the people who had been involved in incidents where people did lose their life.
Very difficult.
And because you can't stop a train when it's going that fast. How many on average incidents like that would Amtrak have a year?
Well, I can't talk about Amtrak in general, but for my area, those 10 states that I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I would say I averaged 4 to 6 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And you figure there's at least 4 crew members, 2 engineers and 2 conductors on each train. And I'm not talking about the onboard service employees like the waiters and the porters and those things. I'm just talking about the 2 engineers and the 2 conductors. So that's 4 times 6. So that's 24 employees a month that could be impacted. Or more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes I've had 4 in a week.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the sad statistic is every 2 hours in this country, a train collides with a vehicle or a pedestrian. So that's a lot of collisions. And so the impact of that on the crew who see somebody right before they hit them,
Mm-hmm.
who may look in somebody's eyes right before they hit them, who, whether they're walking, running, trying to beat the train. Oh, and a lot of people do suicide by train. So, yeah, it's pretty horrific. So, and so what I would do is basically what we call psychological first aid. Immediately, you know, find out where the person is. Are they safe? Are they still on the train? I'd have engineers calling me from the train telling me they just hit somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, whenever that happens, police have to come to the scene. Is it a crime scene? Well, depending on the jurisdiction, all jurisdictions have different things they have to do. So that means this engineer may be on that train for a while. Can they safely continue to operate the train? If not, then they have to get a crew out there to replace the crews that were there. I've been at locations. I've seen blood. I've seen people walking through blood. It's just a horrific scene. Now, it's not something I would normally see, because how can I help you recover from something so horrific if I'm viewing it myself? It just so happened that I happened to be at a situation, and which was not pleasant to see.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So it's something I will never forget. But then I think about the crews that see this all the time, and if it's a child, a young person, it's very likely that this crew member will never work again.
At that point, would that be considered some sort of work disability, or is there some sort of special plan in place to try to find them another position?
Well, they're in a union, the Brotherhood of Locomotive.
BRAC.
The Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, the BLE.
The BLE, okay.
So those are engineers, and then there's the conductors is a different. Everybody has a different union. Conductors is a different union. The people who work on the train, like the waiters, the attendants, there's a different. They may be the Brotherhood of Railroad.
Airline and.
Yeah, they may be BRAC. They're probably BRAC, but the conductors and the engineers are different. And so I don't know how easy it is to go from one union to another. But certainly, I mean, yeah, there's a disability programs. There are programs, medical leaves and those kind of things, disability leaves in place if somebody can't continue on. And then I guess they'd have to try to apply for something else. But with these different unions, I don't know how easy that is to.
It can be very siloed work. Okay.
Mhm.
So, and was that department always in, because you mentioned that the safety department wasn't always in place, but increasingly Amtrak realized that they needed.
Yeah, I don't know. When I first started there, they must have had some kind of safety department. I would imagine that when Congress instituted that rail safety, the rail safety, what was that called? 1970, Congress instituted the Rail Passenger Safety Act.
Okay.
I would imagine safety would have had to have been a part of it. I just wasn't involved in safety in 71, when I started in 74, but I'm sure that must have been a part of it, because it was the Rail Passenger Safety Act, so I'm sure they had a safety department. I just wasn't involved in it.
Well, how long has their counseling department,
EAP?
been
I would
or providing, even if the department itself has maybe changed over time?
I'm
like
sure that must have been
served.
around from the beginning.
Okay.
I would imagine, yeah.
Okay.
Because you would have to have some of these, like it was probably under HR. What back then they called it personnel, as an employee's benefit, if they had any emotional or psychological problems or drug and alcohol problems. And of course, Amtrak's under the Department of Transportation, engineers and conductors, and then certain other employees, they are randomly drug and alcohol tested on a regular basis. So that's got to be a huge part of the program. So.
You mentioned the unions a second ago, and I was just wondering if and I realize you maybe didn't work directly with the union members, but can you maybe speak to Amtrak's attitude toward having organized labor?
Well, what I would say is that I would say that certain leaders, administrators, vice presidents had great relationships with the union employees. Amtrak had a program called Operation Red Block, which was a management sanctioned labor management peer program to combat drug and alcohol problems on the workplace. I mean, drugs and alcohol was just not allowed on the workplace, period. And if anybody had a problem, let's say they ingested it off the property and came on, I mean, that had to be addressed. So they had this great, oh, your door.
Okay.
Yeah, so Amtrak's, it was a labor management program. Great program, because to me it tied in safety as well. All of the unions supported this, and so it was such an incredible collaboration between labor and management. And of course I worked a lot in it, because if you had an employee who had a drug and alcohol problem or any kind of a problem that impacted his or her ability to do their job, the union rep was going to be a part of that process to make sure this employee got the assistance they needed to get back on the job. So I had a great relationship with the union reps in all different crafts in those 10 states. And I would say that Amtrak did a great job of building those coalitions and collaborations between labor and management. And to my knowledge, they're still doing that. I don't know if this really started with Operation Red Block, this labor management peer program to prevent drug and alcohol use and abuse, but I saw a lot of great coalitions and collaboration between labor and management. And I utilize the union reps all the time. Certainly in my job as a counselor, there was a lot of confidentiality issues. So I had to make sure that if somebody at the workplace was going to be possibly terminated or had a problem, I needed to make sure they were okay with me talking to their union rep, or if their union rep could be part of the process. And so from my perspective, yes.
Okay. Okay. No. Yeah. That's okay. So was being the EAP counselor, was that your last position? So you did that until you retired?
Yes.
In 2011?
Yeah.
So
11 years.
Okay. Okay. And of your entire career with Amtrak, was that your most rewarding?
Well, it's a toss-up between that and safety.
Okay.
I would say at the time when I was in the safety department, that's really what I wanted to do, and I loved it, and I'm still, like I said, miss safety. The EAP work, it's very, very rewarding, but it can drain the life out of you, and emotionally draining, the kind of work that I did, working with the kinds of clients that I did. I would say I loved it, but it was more emotionally draining at the time. I was really worn out by the time those 11. I would have had to kind of shift things. If I hadn't retired, I would have had to kind of shift things a bit, because it was taking a toll on me physically and emotionally.
And that goes back to the conversation we had earlier, where more women in higher level positions or positions with a lot of responsibility are having more health problems, the same number as men.
Yeah.
So, well, we have only a few minutes left. I'm sorry that we kind of can't finish.
Well, you can call me.
But I just wanted to ask if there's anything we didn't talk about that...
I can't think of it right now.
Okay.
If you think of anything, call me.
And we can always...
Hey, look.
We're planning future adventures.
Yes.
So we can always have part two. Even if it's only a half hour, we can always follow up.
Yeah, I can't think right now. Do you have an email address? If there's anything, here, put that on there. If there's anything
I can do that. Well, let me finish that.
Okay.
Say thank you because
Okay.
we're going to get kicked out of here in just a second. So let me finish this interview. Thank you so much for this. It's been so enlightening.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm kind of a logistics person. I like to know how things work, and so certainly this adds to my knowledge of the collections I get at the archives. Every time I learn a little more about a specific job, it helps me really understand my collections better and what my researchers might be interested in. So
Okay.
thank you very, very,
You
very
are
much
very, very welcome.
for the interview today.